The taste of your own blood has a strange way of focusing the mind. I leaned back against the sun-scorched boulder, squinting at the red-streaked bandana in my trembling hands. My cracked lips had finally split open after 5 days without proper hydration. The metallic tang mixed with the dust that seemed to have permanently coated my tongue. I watched as a drop of sweat slid down my forearm, carving a clean path through the dirt before vanishing into the parched earth beneath me. By my calculations, that single drop contained more moisture than I'd consumed in the last 8 hours. My name is Dr. Raymond M. I'm a 63-year-old geologist who spent 4 decades studying desert formations across 5 continents. None of that mattered when my truck's transmission failed, 30 miles from the nearest paved road in the northern Nevada desert. None of that helped when my satellite phone showed no signal and my emergency beacon malfunctioned. All that experience, all that knowledge, and yet there I was, watching my own blood stain a bandana while calculating how long I could survive on 2 energy bars, 1/3 of a water bottle, and whatever moisture I could extract from barrel cacti. 9 days. That's how long it took. 9 days in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. 9 days that nearly broke me, body and mind. This is how I lived to tell about it. The morning everything went sideways started normally enough. I'd been mapping unusual sedimentary formations in the remote reaches of Nevada's Black Rock Desert for 3 days. Standard fieldwork for my latest research project. The isolation didn't bother me. Solitude had been my companion throughout most of my career. Just going to check that outcropping before the heat gets unbearable, I muttered to myself. A habit developed over years of solo expeditions. Talking aloud helped organize my thoughts, even when there was no one to hear them. I'd parked my modified Ford F-150 at the base of a narrow canyon, gathered my basic field kit, and headed out for what should have been a 2-hour excursion. My truck was equipped with everything a seasoned field geologist might need. Extra water, food supplies for a week, emergency medical kit, sleeping bag, satellite phone, portable solar panels, and enough geological equipment to outfit a small university lab. The outcropping was fascinating. Paleozoic limestone that had no business being exposed in this region. I lost track of time, collecting samples and taking photographs. By the time I checked my watch, the merciless sun was directly overhead and the temperature had climbed to 103 degrees Fahrenheit. "Damn it, Ray," I scolded myself, quickly packing up my samples. Basic rookie mistake. I hurried back to the truck, already feeling the first warning signs of heat stress. My lightweight hiking shirt clung to my back, soaked through with sweat that evaporated almost instantly in the bone-dry air. The landscape warped slightly at the edges of my vision, the beginning of heat-induced distortion. When I finally reached the truck, I gulped down water from my canteen and cranked up the air conditioning. As the cool air washed over my face, I plotted my next move. The sensible option was to head back to my base camp near the small town of Gerlach, about 70 miles south. I'd return to this site another day, perhaps earlier in the morning. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. Relief. I shifted into drive and pressed the accelerator. Nothing happened. I tried again. The engine was running, but the truck wouldn't move. What the? I shifted to neutral, then back to drive. Still nothing. After 30 minutes of increasingly desperate troubleshooting, including crawling under the vehicle in the scorching midday heat, I reached a grim conclusion. The transmission had failed. Completely. The truck was dead in one of the most remote areas of the continental United States. No problem, I thought. This is why I carry multiple backup systems. I reached for my satellite phone, only to find it displaying the one message no one ever wants to see in the wilderness. No signal. I moved to higher ground. Still nothing. The emergency beacon fared no better. Its diagnostic lights indicated a malfunction in the transmitter. As the reality of my situation sank in, a cold sensation spread through my chest despite the oppressive heat. I was stranded. The nearest paved road was at least 30 miles away. The nearest settlement was even farther. My research coordinator wasn't expecting to hear from me for another 4 days. No one would start looking until after that. I took inventory of my situation. 3 gallons of water, food for about a week, first aid supplies, geological tools, useless for survival, maps of the region, a failing satellite phone, a broken emergency beacon, one 63-year-old body with a replaced knee and medication for hypertension, not ideal. I considered my options: stay with the truck and wait for rescue. That could mean waiting for up to a week, possibly longer, in temperatures that regularly exceeded 100 degrees during the day and dropped below 40 at night. The water might last if I rationed severely. But what if no one came? The alternative? Attempt to walk out. 30 miles across desert terrain, carrying as much water as possible. Under normal circumstances, an experienced hiker might cover that distance in 2 days. But at my age, in this heat, and carrying supplies, both options carried potentially fatal risks. But at least with the truck, I had shade and a known location. If I started walking and collapsed, no one would know where to look. I decided to wait, at least for now. That first night in the truck was surprisingly peaceful. I'd survived worse conditions during my career. I carefully rationed water and food, watched the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors, and prepared for the long wait ahead. I even maintained my habit of journaling, documenting my situation with the detached interest of a scientist. Day 1 of vehicle failure, I wrote. Transmission non-functional. Communications compromised. Adequate supplies for 5 to 7 days with careful rationing. Will attempt phone repair tomorrow. I had no way of knowing that within 48 hours, everything would change. The battery died on the second day. I'd been conservative with its use, running the AC only during the hottest parts of the afternoon, using the radio sparingly to check for signals. But by noon on day 2, the electrical system gave up, leaving me without even the small luxury of the ventilation fan. The temperature inside the truck cab quickly became unbearable. I rigged a makeshift shade structure using my tarp and some hiking poles, creating a small shelter beside the vehicle. It helped, but not enough. By mid-afternoon, I was feeling the effects of heat exposure despite careful hydration. That night, I made a decision. Waiting passively for rescue suddenly seemed like a slower form of suicide. I needed to be proactive. The maps showed a seasonal creek bed about 12 miles east. Dry now, but deep enough that I might find groundwater by digging. Beyond that, another 15 miles would bring me to an infrequently used dirt road that eventually connected to Highway 34. I would walk out, not all at once. That would be suicide for someone my age in these conditions. Instead, I'd cache water along the route, making short return trips to the truck between progressively longer journeys. I spent the night preparing. I fashioned a carrying system for water using my backpack and some cord. I studied the maps until I could visualize the terrain with my eyes closed. I wrote a detailed note explaining my plan and left it prominently displayed on the truck's dashboard, weighed down with a rock. Just before dawn on the third day, I set out on my first leg. The temperature was a relatively mild 68 degrees as I started walking east, carrying a gallon of water, basic survival supplies, and enough food for 2 days. The desert looks flat from a distance, but anyone who's walked it knows better. The terrain constantly rises and falls in subtle ways that maps don't capture. What appears to be easy walking becomes a seemingly endless series of small ridges and depressions, each requiring more energy than expected. I maintained a steady pace, keeping the rising sun to my right. The weight of the water pulled at my shoulders, the straps of my improvised carrying system digging into flesh that had grown softer with age. Every step raised a small puff of dust that settled on my boots, turning them from brown to gray within the first hour. By mid-morning, I'd covered about 4 miles, according to my GPS. Not bad for a man my age in these conditions. I found a suitable location, a distinctive rock formation that would be easy to find again, and buried half a gallon of water, marking the spot with a small cairn of stones. Then I turned around and headed back to the truck. The return journey was significantly harder. The sun was high now, the temperature pushing 95 degrees. My pace slowed as my body fought against the heat. When the truck finally came into view, the relief was so intense, I felt lightheaded. I rested through the hottest part of the day, sheltering under my makeshift tarp. As the sun began its descent, I prepared for my second journey. This time, I would reach my first water cache, collect it, and push further, establishing a second cache before returning. Progress was slow, but methodical. Over the next 2 days, I established a series of water caches along my planned route, each one taking me farther from the truck, but bringing me closer to potential rescue. By the 5th day, I was ready for the final push. I had cached water at strategic points along the entire route to the seasonal creek bed. Now, I would leave the truck behind for good, collecting each cache as I passed it, staying overnight at the creek bed, hopefully finding water, and then continuing to the dirt road. I left another note in the truck, updating my situation and plan. I took a final inventory of my supplies. 1.5 gallons of water distributed in caches along the route, food for 3 days, first aid kit, signal mirror, whistle pocket knife, matches and lighter, Mylar emergency blanket, topographic map and compass, broken satellite phone, still carrying it in hopes of finding signal. My journal and pen, I took one last look at the truck that had been both my doom and my shelter. Then I turned east and began walking, just as the first light of dawn broke over the distant mountains. The journey started well. I reached my first cache without incident and continued toward the second. The weight of my pack felt manageable. My spirits were high, and the temperature remained relatively mild as clouds had moved in overnight. It was between the second and third caches that things began to unravel. The clouds that had provided merciful shade suddenly darkened. In the desert, rain can be both salvation and death sentence. Flash floods can transform dry washes into raging torrents within minutes. The geography here meant I wasn't in immediate danger from flooding. But there was another threat: lightning. In the open desert, a person becomes the tallest object for miles. The first bolt struck perhaps a mile away, the thunder following almost instantly. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach a cluster of rocks I could see in the distance. The air took on that peculiar metallic quality that precedes a major electrical storm. I didn't make it to the rocks. The world turned white. A deafening crack split the air. I felt nothing at first, then everything at once. A sensation like being struck simultaneously by a baseball bat and an electric current. I was on the ground, though I had no memory of falling. For several seconds, or perhaps minutes, I simply lay there, stunned. Rain began to fall, fat drops that raised tiny puffs of dust before the ground could absorb them. The water hit my face, and I instinctively opened my mouth to catch what I could. When I finally tried to move, Pain shot through my left leg, so intense that my vision narrowed to a pinpoint before expanding again. I looked down, dreading what I might see. No visible injury, but my leg wouldn't support weight. Not broken, I decided after careful examination, but badly bruised or possibly strained from the fall. The lightning had struck close enough to knock me down, but not close enough for a direct hit, which would have been fatal. I dragged myself to a sitting position as the rain intensified. In any other circumstance, I would have celebrated the water falling from the sky. Now, it only complicated an already dire situation. My pack had landed several feet away. I crawled to it, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through my leg. The satellite phone had fallen out and lay in a puddle of rapidly accumulating rainwater. I grabbed it, more out of habit than hope. To my astonishment, when I pressed the power button, the screen flickered to life. The water had done something, shorted a connection, bypassed a damaged component, and somehow the device was functioning again. The signal strength showed only 1 bar, wavering in and out, but it was more than I'd had for days. With trembling fingers, I dialed the emergency contact number I knew by heart. "This is Desert Basin Research Station," a voice crackled through static. "This is Raymond M.," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "I'm stranded approximately 30 miles northwest of Gerlach. Vehicle disabled. I'm injured. Need immediate extraction." "Ray? Is that you? We've had search teams." The connection dissolved into static, then dropped entirely. But it had been enough. They had heard me. They knew I was alive. They would be looking. I had to move. The third cache was less than a mile away, and I needed to reach it before the storm washed away my marker. Lightning continued to flash across the sky, but it was moving away now, the danger receding with each passing minute. I fashioned a crude walking stick from the metal frame of my backpack and forced myself to stand. The pain was excruciating, but manageable if I kept most of my weight off the injured leg. I gathered what I could carry and began hobbling toward the cache location. The rain stopped as suddenly as it had begun, giving way to an eerie stillness. Steam rose from the desert floor as the sun emerged, turning the world into a shimmering, surreal landscape. The temperature rose rapidly. It took me over 2 hours to cover less than a mile. When I finally reached the cache site, I discovered that the brief but intense rainfall had partially exposed the buried water container. By some miracle, it remained intact. I collapsed next to it, unscrewed the cap with shaking hands, and took a small, careful sip. The water was warm and tasted of plastic, but it might as well have been the finest wine. As I sat there, rationing sips of water and assessing my situation, I realized the storm had irrevocably altered my plans. With my injury, reaching the dirt road was no longer realistic. My best option was to remain near the cache, conserve my resources, and wait for the rescue that I hoped was coming. I used the emergency blanket to create a small reflective shelter, anchoring it with rocks and the walking stick. The mylar surface would reflect both the sun's heat during the day and my body heat at night. More importantly, it might be visible from the air. Night fell with the peculiar abruptness that characterizes the desert. The temperature plummeted, and I huddled beneath the emergency blanket, allowing myself only the smallest nibble of food. My leg throbbed relentlessly, the pain keeping me from anything more than fitful dozing. By morning, the swelling had increased dramatically. The skin was discolored, stretched tight over what appeared to be significant fluid accumulation. I couldn't bend the knee at all. When I tried to stand, the world swam before my eyes, and I nearly lost consciousness. I was effectively immobilized, with dwindling supplies in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. That was the moment reality truly hit me. For the first time in my life, I was facing a situation where my knowledge, experience, and determination might not be enough. Despite the call I'd managed to make, rescue might not arrive in time. I might actually die here, alone, in this vast, indifferent landscape. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it brought a strange clarity. If these were to be my final days, I would face them with the same methodical observation I'd applied to my life's work. I began documenting everything in my journal, not just practical details of my situation, but reflections, memories, messages to my daughter Elaine and my grandson Max. "The desert reveals the essential nature of things," I wrote. "Stripped of pretense and comfort, one finds the bedrock of oneself. I've spent my life studying what lies beneath the surface. How fitting that at the end, I'm doing the same with my own existence." Day 6 brought hallucinations. They started subtly, a movement at the periphery of my vision, a voice that seemed to call my name. By afternoon, as the temperature climbed to 107 degrees according to my thermometer, they became more elaborate. My late wife, Catherine, sat beside me in the shade of the emergency blanket. Her hair the rich auburn it had been before cancer took her 12 years ago. She didn't speak, just watched me with the same patient expression she'd worn through 40 years of marriage. "You're not real," I told her. She smiled and shook her head slightly, as if my statement missed the point entirely. Later, a coyote appeared at the edge of my small camp. Not a hallucination. This one was real, its ribs visible through its dusty fur, eyes wary but curious. We regarded each other for several minutes, two desert survivors assessing the situation. "Sorry, friend," I rasped. "Nothing to share." The coyote tilted its head, then turned and trotted away, disappearing into the shimmering heat waves. That night, the temperature dropped lower than any previous night. I shivered uncontrollably, despite wrapping myself in every layer I had. The moon rose, nearly full, casting the landscape in silver light so bright I could have read by it if I'd had the strength to write. I must have fallen into a delirious sleep, because I awoke to the sound of my satellite phone ringing. An impossible sound, since the battery had died again shortly after my emergency call. Yet the ringing continued, insistent. I opened my eyes to see the screen glowing in the darkness. The caller ID displayed a single word: Catherine. Even in my delirious state, I recognized the hallucination for what it was. Yet I reached for the phone anyway, my fingers trembling. "Hello?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Ray?" Catherine's voice, exactly as I remembered it. "You need to move." "Can't," I mumbled. "My leg." "You have to. Tomorrow. Follow the wash southeast. There's water." The connection ended with a click, the screen going dark. I let the phone fall to the ground beside me, tears streaking through the dust on my face. Even my hallucinations were trying to save me now. But when morning came, bringing marginal clarity with it, I considered the message. The seasonal creek bed I'd been aiming for initially lay about 3 miles farther east. But there was a smaller wash, visible on my maps, that curved southeast from a point not far from my current position. Was it possible? Could there be water there? I had less than half a liter left in my container. My food was nearly gone. My leg remained unusable. But staying meant certain death. I made my decision. Using my walking stick and sheer determination, I packed what little I had and began an excruciating journey southeast. Progress was measured in yards, not miles. Each step with my good leg followed by a dragging motion with the injured one, sent spikes of pain through my entire body. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes and soaking my shirt until there was nothing left to sweat. The sun climbed higher, its heat pressing down like a physical weight. My vision narrowed to a tunnel focused only on the next few feet of ground ahead. Hours passed in a blur of pain and effort. Just as I felt I could go no farther, the ground began to slope downward. I'd reached the edge of the wash. It was dry, as expected, a gully about 6 feet deep with steep sides of loose soil and rock. Getting down into it would be challenging. Getting out on the other side, perhaps impossible in my condition. But I'd come this far. I sat at the edge, then carefully lowered myself, sliding down in a controlled fall that nonetheless sent fresh agony through my injured leg when I landed. I lay at the bottom for several minutes, waiting for the pain to subside to a manageable level. When I finally looked up, I saw something that made my heart stutter. A small dark patch on the otherwise bone-dry soil about 50 yards downstream. Moisture. Using the walking stick and my one good leg, I propelled myself forward, half crawling, half dragging toward what I prayed wasn't another hallucination. As I got closer, the dark patch resolved into a small depression where water had collected. Not much, perhaps a few cups worth, but unquestionably real. I reached it and plunged my hand into the cool wetness. It was silty, filled with suspended clay and minerals, but it was water. I forced myself to think before drinking. If I consumed it directly, the silt might cause digestive issues that would only worsen my dehydration. I needed to filter it. But how? The answer came in the form of my bandana. I folded it into a thick pad, held it over my water container, and slowly poured the precious liquid through the fabric. Most of the silt remained trapped in the cloth, the water running through relatively clear. I allowed myself 2 small sips, then continued downstream. If there was one seep, there might be others, perhaps even a larger source. My hallucination, or my subconscious, had been right. The wash gradually revealed more signs of moisture, and after another 100 yards of painful progress, I found what I'd been searching for. A depression under an overhanging bank where water seeped from the soil, collecting in a pool about the size of a dinner plate. It wasn't much, but it was a steady source, replenishing itself slowly as I watched. More importantly, the overhanging bank provided shade, something I desperately needed as the day's heat reached its peak. I collapsed in that blessed shadow, rationing the water I'd collected and watching the small pool gradually refill. For the first time in days, I felt something akin to hope. That night, huddled against the bank of the wash, I experienced a strange moment of peace. The sky above was impossibly clear. Stars scattered across the darkness like luminous dust. The Milky Way stretched from horizon to horizon, its cloudy spiral a reminder of just how small we all are. "If I die here," I wrote in my journal, "know that I was looking at the stars and thinking of those I love." But I didn't die that night. On the morning of day 7, I awoke to the sound of an engine. At first, I thought it was another hallucination. The sound was distant, easily dismissed as wind or the buzzing of insects. But it persisted, growing neither louder nor softer, as if circling somewhere beyond my field of vision. A plane, a search plane. I needed to signal it, but how? I was trapped in a wash, hidden from aerial view. My emergency blanket was the most visible object I had, but it was currently providing my only shelter from the sun. The signal mirror might work, but I would need to climb out of the wash to use it effectively. There was no choice. I had to try. I gathered my remaining strength and began the agonizing process of climbing the bank of the wash. My injured leg was useless, and the loose soil kept giving way beneath my good one. I fell back twice, the second time striking my head against a protruding rock. Warm wetness trickled down my temple, but I ignored it, focused entirely on reaching the top. The engine sound was fading. They were moving away. With a final, desperate effort, I clawed my way over the edge of the wash and collapsed on flat ground. The sun hit me with full force, but I barely noticed as I fumbled for the signal mirror. The plane was just visible in the distance, a small white speck against the blue sky. I raised the mirror, trying to steady my shaking hands enough to catch the sunlight at the right angle. A flash of reflected light shot from the mirror's surface. I directed it toward the plane, making the pattern I'd practiced countless times in training. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short. SOS in the language of light. The plane continued its course, seemingly oblivious. I tried again, forcing my trembling arms to hold steady. Flash, flash, flash. Flash, flash, flash. Flash, flash, flash. The speck that was the plane completed its turn and began heading in my direction. They'd seen me. I collapsed back onto the ground, the mirror falling from my suddenly nerveless fingers. The sound of the engine grew steadily louder. I wanted to wave, to stand, to do anything to make myself more visible. But I had nothing left. My consciousness began to fade, the edges of my vision darkening. The last thing I remember was the sound of the plane's engine changing pitch as it circled directly overhead. I woke in a hospital room in Reno, an IV in my arm and monitors beeping steadily beside me. My first conscious thought was surprise. Not that I'd been rescued, but that I felt disappointed. After 9 days alone in the desert, facing mortality with a clarity I'd never before experienced, the return to beeping machines and antiseptic smells seemed almost a letdown. My daughter Elaine's face appeared above me, her eyes red-rimmed from what I suspected was a combination of tears and lack of sleep. "Hey, Dad," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Welcome back." I tried to speak, but found my throat too dry. She held a cup with a straw to my lips, and I sipped gratefully. "The search teams," I managed to rasp. "How did they find me? I was hidden in the wash." "You weren't hidden well enough, apparently," she said with a weak smile. "The pilot spotted the reflection from your mirror. They almost missed it." They were about to move to another search grid. I later learned that my satellite phone call had indeed been received, triggering a search operation that had been underway for 3 days by the time they found me. The storm that had simultaneously injured me and allowed my phone to briefly function had probably saved my life. The medical details were sobering. Severe dehydration, second-degree burns on my face and arms from sun exposure. A deep contusion on my left thigh with significant hematoma, the result of my fall during the lightning storm. Early stages of rhabdomyolysis, a dangerous condition where damaged muscle tissue releases proteins into the blood that can cause kidney failure. "You cut it close, Dr. Mitchell," my physician told me bluntly. Another day out there, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. But we were having it. I had survived. The physical recovery was straightforward, if uncomfortable. The emotional and psychological processing of the experience proved more complex. How does one return to normal life after facing one's mortality so directly? How does the mundane world of faculty meetings and research grants compare to 9 days staring into the abyss? Journalists called, wanting the story of the 63-year-old geologist who had survived alone in the desert. My colleagues treated me with a new kind of deference, as if my experience had conferred some mystical wisdom. My grandson asked if I'd seen any aliens during my adventure. But the truth of what happened to me in those 9 days defies easy narratives or sensational headlines. Yes, I survived against significant odds. Yes, I applied my knowledge and experience to extend my life long enough for rescue to arrive. But the real story, the one I find myself unable to fully articulate, is about what happens when everything is stripped away and you're left with only yourself and the absolute indifference of nature. I returned to the desert 6 months later. Not to the exact location of my ordeal, I'm not that foolish, but to the edges of the Black Rock Desert, where civilization maintains its tenuous foothold against the vast emptiness beyond. Standing there, watching the sun set over the distant mountains, I felt a curious sense of homecoming. The desert had nearly killed me, yet I felt drawn back to it, like visiting the grave of an old friend who had taught you a difficult but necessary lesson. What did I learn in those 9 days? That survival often comes down to a series of small, correct decisions rather than grand heroics. That the human body is simultaneously incredibly fragile and remarkably resilient. That facing death doesn't necessarily bring profound revelations, but rather a crystalline clarity about what truly matters. And what matters, I discovered, isn't accomplishment or recognition or even knowledge itself. What matters is connection to loved ones, to purpose, to the world around us in all its brutal beauty. I am 64 years old now. My hair is a bit whiter, my limping gait a reminder of those 9 days, but when people ask if I regret what happened, if I wish I could erase that experience from my life, my answer surprises them. No. I wouldn't trade those 9 days in hell for anything. They taught me how to live.